This talk is a lot about home, so it was a great delight for me yesterday. Close to where I live, there's a camping site for our Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and yesterday it pleased me, walking past, that there were a whole group of people sitting around the camping site and talking about the continuation of their history. It seemed perfect for this lecture. Now, capitalism is a force that can't be stopped, but it needs to be carefully controlled. Last month, Louise Marshall discussed 14th century Italian paintings representing good and bad styles of government. The wall-filling images by Ambrogio Lorenzetti and Simone Martini served as an ethical code for the governors of the Republic of Siena. The governors met in the Palazzo Pubblico, where they sat facing those instructive paintings. 40 years ago, Melbourne artist Jeff Lowe was inspired by the pre-capitalist world depicted in Lorenzetti's paintings. Returning to Melbourne, he produced his own large paintings on the idea of good government and the idea of bad government in Australia. Lowe said the ideas he represented were not his alone. He consulted 100 people about what they thought. The image of good government is of a relatively poor yet relaxed non-capitalist community that's busily restoring the environment. The style deliberately steps back from the pictorial skills of rendering scale, space, bodies, colour and tone that glamorise Lorenzetti's murals. There's a man reclining in the foreground with his head out of the frame on our side of the picture. In other words, he's us, his viewers. The woman lying flatly beside him blends into the ground like nature. Also in the foreground is a large dog lying in a similar way, tummy up. The Australian plants growing around them are all the same small size, as if recently planted. Behind are lots of buildings of various kinds, including several churches, a mosque, and a building shaped like a glass pineapple. A tall windowless structure in the shape of a money box suggests a community able to manage with small rather than large amounts of money. At back centre is a walled town through which runs a highway without cars. On this side of the town are two empty sheds, likewise without vehicles. The land at back is scrubby yet handsome, filled with low green scrub and rocky ridges. On the right is a large zone of well-maintained agricultural land. At centre is a dropped area of bare soil, an abandoned quarry occupied by people who are busily working on second-hand items, including a fallen water tank, a kitchen cupboard, a broken bench from a public garden, and various tools. They've set up a couple of garden beds and are digging the ground. A number of people are shown facing a dead tree, into which one man has climbed, and I wonder, is he turning part of the tree back to leafy life? At the edge of the farmland, two men in classical poses are approaching the settlement. Judging from their spears and shields, they are Indigenous Australians. Bad government portrays Australia under capitalist order in a more sophisticated style. A red sky into which smoke is puffing colours the whole scene. The country is under guard by a large man in uniform who, as a sub-theme, is setting fire to some scrub at his feet. Behind him is a boxed grave and an expanse of land scattered with logs from felled trees. There are lots of neat high-rise buildings. At left is a penthouse apartment, the interior of which is dominated by a large television screen, showing what once had been a typical Australian landscape that is now gone. On the flat roof is a baby, pulled in 2 directions by hands holding ropes tied to his arm and ankle. Held back though he is by a hand reaching out of an attic window, his floating body is pointing in the direction of a Zeppelin Noah's Ark that's being carried through the air by winged angels. The floating Noah's Ark offers rescue to people via a ladder reaching down to the ground. Centering the canvas is a deep, spiralling mine. Its purpose is the opposite of the relaxed, abandoned quarry in a good government. Within the rubble of rocks and water spurting from the upper edge of the mine are 2 ghostly, naked figures, barely visible. Under the root of the garden is a small grey boy, fleeing from the bad government, crying as he runs away. What spurred me to give this talk about art, politics and community was a conversation I had with my grandnephew, who came around to help me in the garden. The 20-year-old told me he'd been arrested and was to face a court case. It will happen in June. I was flabbergasted because his temperament is not at all violent, and I greatly admire his friendly link with homeless people. For 3 years, since the age of 17, he's been working several nights a week to feed homeless people. The small group of helpers of which he's a member take food out of the bins of Coles, Woolies, in the markets and other food places. They cook the meat and veggies and take meals to the homeless. Teenagers are apprehensive about the adult life they're about to join. For a few awkward years, they, including my own 3 children, question their parents' way of life. Teenagers now challenge not just their parents, but what affects the world at large. They question the lowering of control by governments around the world, the lack of action against environmental damage, the drastic inequality between people produced by super-large global companies, the viciousness of racism, and the constant abrupt impairments of peace between countries. Some are taking Marxism seriously. Over several years from the age of 15, my eldest grandson read Marx's Das Kapital, studied other advisory books, and considered joining the Communist Party or an anarchist group or some other mob advocating an alternative social system. He's since cottoned on to the lack of achievable social improvements by those radical parties. The question remains in his mind, what can be done? When he knew I was to give this talk, my grandson introduced me to the large role violence has in popular culture. In the games and films he showed me, heroes and heroines respond to threats by leaping in aggressively. Add to this the fact that the world's nations, including Australia, are feeling the need to prepare for war. War does not correct what is most problematic, which is the global dominance of private capitalism. Put popular culture together with the world's preparation for war and link them to the ever-increasing global division between the few people whose wealth is overly powerful and an increasing proportion of people in extreme poverty, and you have a social effect we really need to turn around. My grandnephew, lunching with me in the sunny garden, said with a slightly sarcastic smile that he had to thank the federal police for taking away his iPhone and computer because he was now thinking for himself without constantly consulting the internet. We talked for a long time about the frustrated helplessness practically everyone we know keeps expressing about world affairs. The old and the middle-aged are just as obsessed by the subject as the young. We both understood why people can feel belligerent, but felt it was too much in the warmongering style. There has to be better ways of bringing about a change. My grandnephew recommended engaging in art as a means of advocation. He told me that since his arrest, he's been composing a song, and that is helping him to maintain a calm reassurance while dwelling on the problem. We agreed that communal art and witty rather than angry portrayals of inequality were effective. The most notable performer in world politics is Mr. Trump. I know I don't need to bother analysing him. Everyone has noticed how his barrage of never-ending remarks in the media points in all directions with contradictions that deliberately twist truth out of the subject. We all notice too that under that almost comic, contradictory performance is a consistent theme, his power, which goes hand in hand with him not taking on the presidential responsibility of acting according to the American Constitution. Trump is consistent about his personal wishes and his approval of himself. Acting so conspicuously as a president who is directed by his own personal constitution, he's serving the single-minded power of private capitalism. In that respect, he's not alone. There are people of the same kind hovering darkly around him. The world at large has come too closely into our lives in Australia. There's a lot of anxiety about Putin, Netanyahu and Trump. Judging from their speech and actions, they're not looking after their people, rather they're using them, employing governments transparently to aid their own power. They are collapsing their nations. The Australian government now has a hate law, which recently led police to shut down the Dissent Bar in Canberra on the grounds that it was a crime scene. Their words, said the bar's owner, David Howe. Police officers seized the 5 posters in the window. One was that one we've just been looking at. Howe has not regretted displaying those posters. I believe that the artistic merit, the point of the posters, is to foster an awareness of the words and deeds of some of the world leaders in our political system. I think that it's worthwhile to bring that to people's attention, he said. The police soon returned the posters and didn't go ahead with the criminal case. Ever since Australia was first settled as a convict colony, its people have opposed the suppression of free speech. Last December, a few days after the dreadful killing of 16 people at a Jewish gathering at Bondi, the South Australian Premier dismissed the Palestinian-Australian novelist Randa Abdul Fattah from that year's Adelaide Writers' Week. The festival's executive director, Julian Hobber, warned that this would incite a great deal of opposition. Up to 90 writers and most of the board immediately withdrew. The festival was cancelled. Exclusion of this kind from Australia's writers' festivals was not new, nor was the counter effect. In 2023, the Bendigo Writers' Festival collapsed after another Palestinian-Australian writer, Leah Kaminsky, was removed from the program following complaints about her public views. Then in August last year, some months before the tragedy at Bondi, writers preparing for the 2025 Bendigo's Writers' Festival were sent a letter asking them to avoid divisive topics, and those speaking at events hosted by La Trobe University were required to comply with the university's anti-racism plan, which had a broad definition of anti-Semitism, construed to include anti-Zionist criticism of Israel. This too brought people to withdraw from the event. I'm not the only one to be puzzled by Australia's official forbidding of what is called anti-Semitism. For one thing, Why is anti-Semitism taken to mean a fascist attitude to Jews? I understand that the Semites go back into the ancient past and included Palestinians, Arabs, Persian, Hebrews, and other peoples of the Middle East and North Africa. It's far from being the key to Jewish religion. I'll repeat that. It's far from being the key to Jewish religion. If the war against Gaza is driven by the Nazi concept of Semitism, then I certainly am anti-Semitic, without being at all against the Jewish religion. The term anti-Semitic is being employed again, rhetorically, to support the persistent killing of people and destruction of settlements on the Gaza Strip by Netanyahu's Israel. The fact that anti-Palestinian and anti-Muslim attitudes are not forbidden in the same lobbying way has encouraged many Australians to support Palestine and Muslims. It's worth remarking here that Muslim people stand out in Australia's social life as ethical and kind. Jewish people had the same reputation, but they're now damaged by Netanyahu's calculated reuse of the term anti-Semitic. The Drill Hall's public affairs organiser, Dr. Anne-Marie Jean, told me that her niece was in legal trouble. A fine arts student at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Gemma Seymour, faced suspension because she put online a video accusing the RMIT of being complicit in genocide in Gaza, because RMIT's Sir Lawrence Wackett Defence and Aerospace Centre was accepting money from private weapons companies. The news that Gemma was to be punished led hundreds of students and staff to sign a petition, after which the RMIT withdrew the disciplinary proceedings against her, but they've maintained their financial agreement with weapons companies. The Guardian newspaper published 2 articles about the event, stating that understanding what is happening in the Middle East is more important than ever. It's the Guardian's job to keep a close focus on events in the region to help our audience understand every major development. We rely on our readers' backing to keep our correspondence on the ground and our reporting free from commercial or political influence. Now for some stories about imagery and poetry that condemn inequality in Australian life. The wittiest and neatest counter to overt political racism in Australia is the poet Lionel Fogarty's courteous Aboriginal naming of Pauline Hanson as Auntie Pauline. How good it would be if that title stuck to her, because applying the title Auntie instantly evokes a startling mental image that transfers Australia's one nation to Aboriginal people. Born in Cherbourg, Queensland in 1957, the poet Lionel Fogarty died in February this year. He's been honoured by numerous people around the world. To quote Alexis Wright, Australia's greatest novelist, Lionel is a world-class poet, unique, a genius who turned on its head, twisted and undid the same language that had been used for decades against us. Words were his weapon. Over 50 years, he led the way. He taught us to be brave, to stretch the boundaries. He showed us how to act like a sovereign people, speak from the heart of our humanity, and how to respond to our times. Alexis Wright's famous novels are patterned with a verbal structure that moves in Aboriginal rhythms relating to nature, climate, seasons, rights, symbolic diagrams, music, ageing, and social connections. They're fabulous novels. Mia Tinkler, Alex Vella Horn, and Charlie Friedman recall the first time they met Lionel. We went out to his weatherboard house in Undalla, which he called his yellow submarine, to help him set up a Zoom for an online poetry reading. He read poems non-stop for an hour as the sun set over the cow paddock, and we watched the gum trees that greeted us at his gate turn golden pink. The house was overflowing with books, cobwebs, paintings, and tree frogs, and we were struck with the thought, he is the real deal. Lionel speaking his poems, and in recent years painting them, conveys an immediate, highly expressive struggle between emotions, memories, stories, and attitudes. His unique verbal style is informed by the rich linguistic environment he grew up in: Aboriginal English, Creole, a variety of Aboriginal languages, and the formal English used by administrators and educators. A teacher in the United States has shared Lionel's poetry with an Australian Aboriginal man who was incarcerated in Florida. She noticed with awe how the poetry gave him peace in an otherwise traumatic situation. Lionel shifted discourse not only in Australia but across various parts of the world, showing, to quote John Kinsella, how the earth we all share is also an earth of very particular localities, and that without respecting those localities, those countries, there can be no healing, no repair. Another transformative story relates to Gina Rinehart's power in lifting Vincent Namatjira's portrait of her to be seen and exclaimed over by the Australian people and internationally too. The reason she could bring this about was her social positioning as Australia's wealthiest person, worth $36 or $37 billion. The portraitist Vincent Namatjira, an Archibald Prize winner, employs a semi-caricaturing style, mostly from press images, to express the character and self-regard of people, including himself, he says, who interest him, not all in a positive way. A couple of years ago, he was given a magnificent exhibition at the Art Gallery of South Australia, which came to the National Gallery, in which one work, entitled Australia in Colour, grouped together 21 portraits of people, not all of them Australian, but all, he reckoned, prominent in our history. The people famous for discovery, sport, racism, war, money, land claims, music, political leadership, royalty, Namatjira's own family, and art. To name the 21 people portrayed in Australia in colour, they are, from the upper left, Cathy Freeman, Angus Young, Albert Namatjira, King Charles, Charlie Pride, Chuck Berry, James Cook, Queen Elizabeth, Adam Goodes, Gina Rinehart, Vincent Namatjira, Jimi Hendrix, Henry Taylor, Julia Gillard, Vincent Ningiari, Ned Kelly, Lionel Rose, Eddie Mabo, ScoMo, William Punch, and Slim Dusty. One of the Australians in colour was Gina Rinehart. The exhibition had another portrait of her too. The portrait of Gina didn't arouse special attention until she intervened. She emailed Ryan Stokes, a fellow West Australian who's the chair of the National Gallery Council, asking him to get the gallery to please permanently dispose of the two so-called portraits of me. This was followed by more than 26 emails from her supporters asking for the portraits to be removed. If the multi-billionaire had accepted the artist's right to interpret his subjects, the portrait of her would have remained in stylistic equality with the exhibition's many other interesting portraits. To quote Namatjira about his art, "I started painting portraits because I'm interested in people and power, wealth and politics. For me, portraiture is a way of putting myself in someone else's shoes, as well as to share with the viewer what it might be like to be in my shoes. I use portraiture to look at my identity and my family history. It's also a way for me to look at the history of this country, to ask who has the power and why. Let me take you onto country where the past and the present meet, where cheeky humour is side by side with gut-wrenchingly hard stories. This is Australia in colour. He pointed to the power humour had. Having just a little bit of humour can take the power out of a serious situation, whether something is happening to you right now or it happened long ago. Painting some humour into a serious event or an important person lets you be in a little bit of control again. You can get a little bit of cheeky revenge. Another subject artists have addressed is the large damage caused by mines in Aboriginal countries. The Tennant Creek Brio group of artists from northern central Australia has been living and working together on Warramungu country since 2016. Their subject has been the reshaping of their country by mining. Drawing over the printed maps, plans and instructions used by the mining companies, they describe their over-imagery as an upcycling back into Aboriginal country. The group includes one non-Indigenous artist, Rupert Bethoris. The shocking black hole Bethoris painted over the impersonally mapped geological cross-section of Juno Mine is more Western in its pictorial effect than the images painted by his Aboriginal companions. Lindsay Nelson Jacamara's bright sign adds an Indigenous message to what's underneath. The sign's meaning is not necessarily accessible to us because it comes across with a strong visual effect, like that of a fierce magical sign employed in ancient Christian rites to exorcise a witch or demon, to make a ghost flee or stop the Black Death. Joseph Williams Yungarai of the Warramungu people has in some images combined a sign with figuration. Holes like eyes stare at us. They also refer to holes in the mine's printed instructions for a link belt, and more powerfully, they come across as a sign. The edging of land around a mine in another of his images reads like a gentle human figure bending over country in a sad, protective way. Melbourne's Australian Centre for Contemporary Art put on a major exhibition of Tennant Creek Brio art in 2024. The object showed how, to quote an architect, the deeply personal and complex intergenerational influence continues to shape lives, identities, and future thinking. Indigenous Australians have too much pragmatic knowledge of their own histories, as well as of their long contact with Westerners, to absolutely oppose forces such as today's mining. They look for what might benefit them from the people, events, opportunities, and lifestyle brought by the mines. Knowing that mining cannot be prevented, they suffer from the ripping up of their lands, do their best to prevent the destruction of sacred sites, and experience deep grief if this is not successful. Last year, a Noble's Knob gold mine recommenced operations at Tennant Creek. How the Indigenous people managed the return of the big mine to their country is now the question. Excessive greed can lead to terrible events. In recent decades, so much iron has been taken from the Pilbara that what were mountains are now deep holes. In May 2020, the Rio Tinto mining company went into the Yukon Gorge and blew up sacred sites dating back more than 46,000 years. A Putu Kuntu Kuruma traditional owner Birchall Hayes said quietly. That's where our ancestors were occupying their traditional land. Traditionally, we hand that down to the next generation. But in this case, we won't have anything to show the next generation and to tell them stories about what has happened there and what's been passed down from our ancestors. The destruction brought international outrage onto the company. Large global companies are dangerous because their power is great, their purposeful operation is not committed to local values, and they lobby governments for their own benefit. For Australian elders, the purpose of what Westerners call art, we call imagery, storytelling, rites, music, dance, etc., has always been a responsible form of social comment that relates to their own people's communal life and place. For them, the centre of art and life is home. Home has become a major theme in contemporary art in general. It was not such an urgent theme 50 years ago. As an art critic back in the 70s, I attended several meetings where the government's decision to get public galleries, universities, and other institutions to obtain private funds to cover costs was discussed with apprehension. The primary concern was that, unlike the United States, Australians wouldn't give generous amounts of private money. We now realise that what we should have been troubled by was how the standards of universities, art galleries, etc., would decline badly because they were having to focus not on their real function, but on making money. Under capitalism, money-making is a measure of what is worthwhile. It's become a morality. Reckoned as the most important consideration, it affects far too many evaluations in the media. There's a constantly expressed disapproving doubt about the usefulness of anything that stands outside commercial value. The social responsibilities of governments are taken to render their policies unreliable. Dependence on taxpayers' money is said to be wasteful rather than rewarding. By contrast, donations of private money are regarded as potentially profitable. The prominence of an unreliable opinion in the internet and the decline in journalistic standards has meant that the regular evaluation of contemporary art by critics, which went on for more than 2 centuries, has vanished. Art auctions are now the major system, the most unreliable system, by which art is evaluated by money alone. Regretfully, some state galleries now publicise their acquisitions principally in terms of their monetary cost. I'm glad to say that most Australians look beyond capitalism to a more humane approach to life. Hence, they've been voting for our Labor government. Nonetheless, the fixture on monetary profits needs to be publicly recognised as denying humanity. Interesting then how so much art has turned its back on money-making to focus on everyday human life, place, and community. Art is something that's inside all human beings, something at home to us. It's outside commerce. It's not cordoned off from life in general. There's art in the smell and taste of memory. The seasonal party held every spring under a blossoming magnolia tree, the recognisable calls of birds as the season changes, the rhythm of waves on the beach, the night sky in which stars and moon emerge and disappear. An object does not have to be judged as finished, permanent, or moneyed to thrill us personally. It doesn't have to be by an artist. Think of Rosa Gascoigne's play with threading animal bones onto long lengths of wire and curving them through the garden so as to shape the air like nature. This was not finalised as a work of art, but it stays in mind as special. Think of the work it entailed. She began by collecting some animal skeletons, cleansed them by boiling in water, which stank the house for hours, sorted them for size and shape, chose the size of bone that best suited the wire and the large looping vision she had in mind. Having worked out a method, she drove into the country again many times, looking for skeletons to collect, boil, sort and thread into wire. Rosalie devoted herself to her projects in much the same concentrated way that other people give to cooking or knitting or gardening or telling stories, playing music or whatever. For 30 years, Anne-Marie Jean's non-commercial approach, oh, here she is again, has not stopped people from buying it. Like her, artists such as Picasso and Duchamp, who emerged as dominant artists of the past century, put together bits and pieces of cheap, found material in ways that could appear casual as well as productive of a lingering effect. To quote Anne-Marie on the art she exhibited recently, instead of creating illusion, these materials, colours, marks and compositions map out relationships of matter, movement, living interactions, time and space that I experience in the garden. The art in Anne-Marie's exhibition took me through several phases of response. First, the materials and processes are like children's and Picasso's assemblages, direct and engaged. The forms and effects begin to come forward, firstly evoking connections that are one's own, then returning to themselves with my own impressions added. The conversation continues, and I suspect will go on over time, as it does when one lives alongside works of art. So home, always home. Home has been quite a theme in the work of Imants Tillers, an artist whose family home is both Riga in Latvia and Kuma in Australia. Tiller's current 6-month exhibition in Germany makes a connection between Latvia and Aboriginal Australia. Latvian people and people from a growing number of Aboriginal countries have been determinedly working to retain their traditional cultures despite their country's invasion by powerful foreigners. In terms of international recognition, Aboriginal art and our Indigenous cultures have come to stand out as Australia's sovereign achievement, our one nation. Home, family and home place is very much the theme at Bundanon, land on the Shoalhaven River, which Arthur Boyd and his widow Yvonne bequeathed to the Australian people. 30 years of residencies and in recent years exhibitions at Bundanon have brought to us many works of art, books and performances that relate to the place, to the Boyds and their art, and to the Yuin people. Bundanon has become a place that has its own cultural tradition. I went with Deborah Clark and Gordon Bull to see Bundanon's exhibition, The Hidden Line, Art of the Boyd Women. The display was the best possible for engaging viewers in the subject. One went through a long corridor hung on one side with many portraits of women. The portraits weren't arranged by subject or artist. One had to wander up and down, checking, revisiting, and slowly becoming acquainted with the various perspectives on each woman, portrayed as they were at different stages in their lives and by several members of the family. The questioning impression of personalities one gained by looking at those portraits influenced how one checked the works of art in the next rooms. Did the portraits fit the art? Did their art give a firmer sense of the person? The third gallery displayed a very different focus on portraiture, maternal observation. It was filled with many black and white photos taken by Arthur Boyd's sister Mary, who had several children by first husband John Percival. Her second husband was Sidney Norman. The final large gallery included works by contemporary artists that responded to the growing Bundanon tradition. The recent paintings of Carly Marchmont, who was a resident at Bundanon last year, evoked the countryside, Arthur Boyd's electrifying style, and her own ecstatic mental release from physical impairment. A large-scale hand-operated dyeing machine for printing on cloth, called the Plant Sensibilia machine, has been employed at Bundanon and the surrounding Yuin country by Canberra printmaker Rebecca Mayo and two Yuin artists, Auntie Deirdre Martin and Jacob Morris. Using dyes from the site-specific plants, along with Auntie Deirdre's and Jacob's poems and stories, prints and videos have been made that bring the traditional knowledge of the Yuin country into the lives of people living there today. There was a fabulous exhibition of these printed cloths at Shoalhaven Regional Gallery a few months ago. A feeling of internal connection has made some of our local artists seek out Aboriginal colleagues. I remember the delighted shock of walking into Terence Maloon's exhibition of sculptures by Leo Lumens and paintings by the Yolngu artist Nongurnga Marawili. Everyone around me was reacting in the same way. Leo Lumens too. The two artists constructed their works in very different ways, yet their compositions had a quivering link. The experience led Leo to travel right across Australia to Marawili's home place, Yirrkala, where he met Gunibi Ganamba. The clan pattern that Gunibi Ganamba carved on aluminium describes the rippling movement of waters surging from freshwater underground springs in his home country. There's a spring that is sacred, associated with fertility, birth, and the passing of souls between the physical and spiritual worlds. The personal, self-identifying security that's fundamental to our sense of home is threatened by the exposure and insecurity of homelessness. That said, if homeless people have their own safe place, it can feel like home. One of my grandnephew's friends told him he wasn't homeless. The car where he was sleeping safely was his home. For a decade or so, homelessness has been growing fast around the world. During the same period, a small number of people have become grossly wealthy. These effects fit into history as a result of uncontrolled capitalism. I'll keep repeating this because it matters to me. For a decade, exhibitions, films, books and events about homelessness have been held in Australia, the United States, England, France and elsewhere. The main theme has been to create a sense of fellowship between homeless and other people. It's worth acknowledging how the communal focus in Aboriginal art has contributed to how these exhibitions and events are performed. Back in the 2010s, there was an international program whereby people without a home were given a camera. In Australia, Mike Allwright handed out 100 cameras. One of the highlights of the project for him was the photography by Jai Jaru. A film has since been made on Jai by Annette Cohen. In 1993, Willie Baronet began collecting signs written by United States homeless people. Notice 1993, just after a huge collapse in the economy in the United States. In 2014, he made a film, Signs of Humanity, showing himself and collaborators travelling through the United States, buying signs from homeless people and talking with them. A group of his signs was exhibited at Philadelphia, along with Leah Den Bog's photographs of homeless people. A few months ago, some brilliant portraits of homeless people at Geraldton in Western Australia were exhibited at Parliament House in Canberra. Homelessness produces dread in the mind, insofar as it removes safety, personal privacy, and economic security from those who are affected. People are inclined to hold back from acknowledging the poor people they see sitting or sleeping in the streets. Few of us carry cash these days, which means we tend to neglect the need for money. The purpose of the exhibitions about homelessness, in many of which homeless people are participating as artists, is to show how a day-to-day connection with these people can lessen their loneliness and sense of isolation. Social engagement is a good thing, but a lot more needs to be done. One travelling show by Australia's Unseen Arts Hub included a large display of shoes on the ground, to each of which was attached a card. Some homeless people would write an account of his or her troubled life on a card, which other visitors would then read. The domestic park constructed by New Zealand artist Mike Hewson in the vast piece of the Art Gallery of New South Wales' new building fits the theme of accommodating homelessness. Interestingly, it also echoes the image of people living together in the open air in Jeff Lowe's 1983 painting of A Good Government. Before climbing slowly down the winding steps to the park in the pit, I sat to watch a huge video on homelessness in an upstairs gallery. The video shows a relaxing engagement beginning to develop between homeless and not homeless people who at first were nervous about each other. Mike Hewson's title, The Keys Under the Mat, opens up a home to us, as well as paths, large trees, a kids' playground, and a barbecue. The park offers all sorts of equipment for a full domestic life, including a small private home with tiny windows, steam baths, a neat sauna, washing machines for clothes, and showers. There are people all around us using this equipment. In other words, the park offers itself as a home for whoever takes the key from under the mat. To conclude, the fact that homelessness has grown so much around the world is a shame for every nation. To address the stark inequality in Australia, it would help if our government insisted upon a correct amount of money from private companies to be paid before object of trade was shipped out. Taxation needs to be raised to pay for universities, schools, art galleries, and other public institutions without them having to rely on private funding. Nowadays, most, if not all, universities are unable to operate at an appropriate level. We still have a good health system, which makes Australia stand out internationally for its social fairness. Once upon a time, we had a good education system too. Nice if this were to return. How reassuring it would be if our government were to lay down such a bridge over the troubled waters of international turmoil. Thank you.